The Joe Rogan Experience.
During my day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day. Oh, sir.
Hello.
Thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it.
You're quite welcome.
I really enjoyed you on the Meat Eater podcast, and that's why I reached out. And I started reading your book on the Nez Perce, and then I picked this up as well, Continental Reckoning. That's a hell of a book. That's a big book. How long did it take you to write this?
The writing probably 8 to 10 years. The research and so forth, more than 20 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, a long time.
So this is a lifetime of work. Continental Reckoning, the American West, and the Age of Expansion. One of the most fascinating subjects, I think, in the history of the human race. I mean, it is just it's such an amazing story, and such a tragic story, and such a crazy story of the amount of change that took place over a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, 30 years.
Yeah, and how little most people really understand about the actual history of the Native Americans and that. One of the things that was most fascinating about the Meat Eater podcast was that at the time that Lewis and Clark had come to America, 100 years before that, there had been Native Americans that had traveled to France.
That's right.
And met with the king.
That's right. Yep. That's right. 18 or 1720s. There was a group of Native people from Kansas, Missouri area, and they had been courted by the French because the French wanted to expand their fur trade into that area, the Missouri River. So they and the Spanish had recently suffered a terrible military defeat there, sort of what's today eastern Nebraska. So the French sent this guy named Etienne Bourgmont to make contact. He already had contact there, like he had a son by one of the women in the Missouri tribe. Make contact, make some friends, make some allies, courted them, and then to sort of seal the deal, he took back a delegation of about 6 Indians. Now this is from eastern Nebraska.
Which tribe is this?
There were several tribes. The Missouri tribe, the Illinois tribe, Osage. And they were, he then took them back from there down to Mississippi, to New Orleans, and then over across the Atlantic to the Havre, and then they went by coach from there to Paris. And they spent several months there in Paris, being fitted by King Louis XV, visiting the Paris Opera, which is a great place full of sorcerers. Sorcerers.
Why did they describe it as sorcerers?
I think they figured these people were just sort of transformed before their eyes. They just became somebody else, a great actress, of course. I think that was it. They saw this famous puppet show on a Pont-Neuf bridge, and they said it was this place was inhabited by small dwarfs. And they loved it. They were taken to the Court of Fontainebleau. They showed their expertise at hunting by riding bareback in the watermelon in the royal woods, naked and bareback, shooting pheasants. One of them, a woman who was in fact the woman who had born Bourgmont's child, she married a sergeant in Notre Dame. They had a wonderful time, and the men liked just about everything except the men. French men. They said they were sort of effeminate and sissy. They thought they smelled like alligators. Alligators. Yeah. But this was the 1720s, so that's what 80 years. Even native.
That is so fascinating. Now, what was the language barrier? How did they communicate?
Well, there were Bourgmont himself had lived for years among the Indians and was an expert in the Missouri River. He was a Frenchman who came over, enlisted in the army, deserted, sort of went native, and became a coureur de bois, a French mountain man. Took up with the Indians, had this child by this woman, so he knew the language quite well. And there were other, these Indians, as you tell the story, were very cosmopolitan, very sophisticated. They knew English, or some of them did. So I think the point to remember is that this, long before our image of Americans coming into this area, there was all sorts of contact between native peoples and Europeans, all sorts of exchanges. It was really a mixed world, a world that was far more complex, far more interesting, in my opinion, than the usual way that we remember it.
To put it into perspective, it's hard for us in 2023 to look back at this time period and really have a context for it. But to put it into perspective, so first Europeans arrived here essentially in the 1400s. Right?
Yes.
The very first.
Very late 1400s.
So this is 200 plus years after that.
That's right.
So we're essentially talking about us thinking about the 1820s.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
So there's hundreds of years of Europeans slowly making their way across the continental United States.
That's right. Spanish coming up from the south.
Cabeza de Vaca.
1520s. French coming in quite early up to what's today the northeast, eastern Canada. That been going on for a long time before the English began their very slow and timid expansion into the beyond the Appalachians.
It's interesting because if you ask the general public about the expansion, they seem to put it into the time period of the 1800s.
That's right.
But there was so much more going on, hundreds of years of that, which is hard for us to imagine. Again, it's like us thinking that the 1800s, like 1823, was just yesterday. It wasn't. Right. Long time ago. So there's hundreds of years.
Before that, that's right. And that had been going on slowly. It was sort of a slow simmer of these cultures coming together. And so, in many ways, the Indians were far more sophisticated and well-traveled, far-traveled than the Americans who were coming in there. We think our national myth has it that when Lewis and Clark, this is in 1804, 1806, Lewis and Clark make their way up the Missouri River in the West. That's sort of the start of the history of the West. Before that, Lewis's famous quote as they left the Mandan villages in 1805 says, "We're heading up." He compared himself to Columbus. He said, "We're heading into this place where the foot of civilized man has never trodden." Not true.
No, well, to the best of their knowledge, which is interesting also, right? The amount of information that was available back then was so difficult to find out what was going on.
Well, sure. Just like today, information is power.
Right.
And you don't want to let your imperial rivals know what's out there. You don't want them to know what you know.
Right.
So it's these sort of state secrets. Yeah.
So have you read the Cabeza de Vaca book, A Strange New Land?
Yes, I have.
A Land So Strange?
The Land So Strange, Andres Resendez.
Which is a fascinating book because they essentially document the spread of disease without meaning to do it, because that is really where it all started from.
A lot of it did, yeah. It's a wonderful book, right?
It's an amazing book. And, they talk about culture. They talk about the Mayas. And, there's always been this confusion as to what happened to the Mayas, but it's probably the same exact thing that happened to 90+% of the Native Americans that contacted smallpox.
Maybe. Mayas declined a bit before that, but who knows? It's very hard to say. But certainly disease was a very important factor in the conquest of Native peoples and the conquest by Europeans of North America and South America.
Is it clearly established that Cabeza de Vaca was one of the first Europeans to make it to the continental United States, or was it possible that others had made it before that, but we don't have record of it?
He was the first to encounter what we know today as the Southwest. He was part of a shipwrecked expedition on the Texas coast, and he and a few others, including a black African slave, Esteban, Stephen, they were the ones who made their way, first enslaved by the Indians, and then they gradually made their way across the Southwest up to what is today Arizona, like the Zunis, and then made their way southward into Mexico.
This episode is brought to you by Squarespace. You probably already know that Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for creating a website, but they do so much more than that. For example, you can drive sales and engage your audience with Squarespace email campaigns. They make it easy to collect email subscribers and repeat business through regular email updates. You can sell anything you want with Squarespace. This episode is brought.
Fabulous journey. What a story.
It's an insane story. And if you look at the history of the human race across the planet, rather, it's one of the most transformative stories in such a short amount of time, where everything changed so rapidly, because it coincides with the Industrial Revolution, and all these things happen, and then you have massive cities appearing in these places where there was nothing before.
Yeah. That's a bit later.
Yeah, but it's all over this period of a few hundred years, which is such a transformative time period.
That's right. If you think of it sort of I think of it as kind of a curve of change, right? We've got to remember, all kinds of changes, up and down, long before the Europeans, the rise and fall of civilizations, fantastic stories about that.
Yeah.
So there's that, but then the Europeans come into this area, and that line just goes straight up. And it keeps accelerating. So it's important to remember that change has been going on for 15,000 years in Western the United States. Interesting changes that I think people don't recognize nearly enough, and they ought to. But the pace of that change accelerates at this really astonishing degree.
Well, they keep pushing back the date of modern humans in North America as well.
Yeah.
You know, it used to be Clovis first, and then the discovery of these 22,000-year-old footprints.
White sands, yeah.
Yeah, now they don't even know. I mean, maybe there's some stuff that we haven't found that predates that considerably.
I suspect there is. That's one of these questions that we thought we had answered.
Right.
As usual, we had. And that question's been very vigorously argued recently. All sorts of new discoveries in places that we didn't know there were people before until fairly recently, like the Amazon. All of a sudden, we are finding these sites in the Amazon. We have no idea who these people were. They don't seem to be culture related to others in South America. Where they come from?
Right.
Where did they?
Yeah, I've discussed this many times with Graham Hancock, and one of the things that he has brought up recently is the use of LiDAR. And through this use of LiDAR, they found these grids and with irrigation systems and streets and structures and foundations, and all of it unexplained, and all of it was essentially covered by vast rainforest.
Yeah, until fairly recent. It's really only the last 2 or 3 generations that we've begun to even poke our way into that place.
Right.
To begin to figure it out. Theodore Roosevelt's granddaughter is one of the key figures in investigating this.
Really?
Anthropologist, yeah.
She was? Really interesting. Do you think that with the Amazon, that we're looking at disease there as well? That's probably European settlers came in, or
you mean to explain the?
Yeah,
I doubt that. These go way. Those ruins seem to go way back, thousands of years before the Europeans show up.
So there's no explanation for the decline, like maybe some other diseases or something like that. We don't know.
We don't know a whole lot about what diseases were here before the Europeans. But
right.
I don't know. I suspect that if you look at any civilization, it rises, peaks, collapses.
One of the more interesting things that we found was that when you look at the rise of syphilis in Europe, that some are connecting at least some forms of syphilis to European settlers who had come to America and then gone back to Europe and brought syphilis with them.
Yeah. That too is being argued about right now. But right now, the evidence is quite clear. And we're talking about venereal syphilis now.
Yeah.
Syphilis can also be a kind of a skin infection. That was there before. But the first documented cases of syphilis, last time I checked, a very suspicious time, a very suspicious place. It was in Spain in 1493.
Pretty close.
It seems circumstantially pretty clear that Columbus's folks brought that back. Another thing, it was also absolutely devastating, which suggests that this is a new disease. It was not one that we have begun to, we've been around for any length of time. Terrible effects, insanity, fatalities. So that seems pretty clear. There's also evidence of syphilitic bone damage among native peoples going way back in North America. So I think it's pretty safe to say that.
Well, we've talked about it before on the show, but it's really interesting that that's the origin of the term bigwig.
Really?
Did you know about that?
No.
Okay, great. I'm going to tell you something. Okay. So there was, see if you can find out who these French royals were, but there was these French royals who contacted syphilis. They started losing their hair, and so they started wearing these, they put these beautiful wigs on. And the more money you had, the bigger your wig was. And it became, because the syphilis had just run rampant through this population. So many people were losing their hair, and they get these holes in their face, sores. It's really horrific. So these are the gentlemen. Samuel, how do you say his name? Capais? How would you say that? Pepys. So at the time, hair loss was a one-way ticket to public embarrassment. Long hair was a trendy status symbol and a ball dome sustaining reputation. Samuel Pepys' brother acquired syphilis. The diarist wrote, "If my brother lives, he will not be able to show his head, which would be a very great shame to me." Hair was that big of a deal. So the syphilis outbreak sparked a surge in wig making. Victims hid their baldness as well as their bloody sores that scoured their faces with wigs made of horse, goat, or human hair. Perukes were also coated with powder, scented with lavender or orange to hide any funky aromas. Although common wigs were not exactly stylish, they were a shameful necessity. That changed in 1655 when the King of France started losing his hair. And so these guys started wearing wigs, and everybody started wearing wigs. And the bigger your wig was, the more famous and rich and established you were. So the term bigwig.
So you're a bigwig.
Yeah,
that's a wonderful story.
Because I heard about that when I was a kid. Oh, he's a bigwig. Like that had made it to the 1980s. Like,
yeah, absolutely. I think you and I should look into this.
No, I'm good. I like being involved. It's comfortable. It's so easy. You don't have to talk to barbers. Shave your head yourself. Yeah. I enjoy it. And I have a good shaped head, so I'm lucky. Some people have some funky heads, so you got a good head too.
Thanks so much.
So that is a story. That is part of the story. Is this exchange of disease and the lack of immunity and how much of a devastating effect this had on the North Americans who did encounter the Europeans.
That's right, and that's very well established now. Now we're coming to understand that in a more sophisticated way now. For instance, it's not quite true that Indians had no immunity, or that our immunity protected us when we went there. Well, typically a case of these diseases, like smallpox, for example. If you got it as a child, some measles, for mumps, or chickenpox, you watch your kids. You get those because then they're immune. And later on, it's a much more devastating disease if you get it as an adult, as a grown up.
Do we know why?
Okay.
I'm not at all sure. I think it's because when you're young like that, you can deal with it more effectively. I'm not sure. But there's a case, especially viruses like smallpox. You then gain lifetime immunity. So what probably was going on was that smallpox was so common in Europe. The Europeans who came over here likely had it in their case. So it wasn't that they had genetic immunity.
Right. They had previous exposure.
Right. Also the fact that, especially later on, when time passes, the greater mortality rate among Indians was because of the general generation of their condition. Just like when we see in COVID, people who are the poorest and people who have the least medical care, they're the ones who are most vulnerable.
The oldest, and ones with mortality, comorbidities.
But what's absolutely incontestable is that the effect of diseases on Indian peoples was absolutely catastrophic. And it goes a long way toward explaining how the Europeans were able to take control of the continent as quickly as they did.
Yeah, there's some estimations that 90% of the Native Americans died from disease.
It's well, the population declined by as much as 90 or even 94%. Disease is an important factor. But think of that. If smallpox hits an Indian village, let's say, in the Dakotas, it kills, unlike other diseases, smallpox is sort of democratic. It kills all ages. Right? It kills the most productive, it kills the hunters, it kills the mothers who are nursing their children. So these secondary effects that kind of lost, what happened if Austin, Texas lost 40% of its people. The other 60% they survive, but not for long. The whole system further collapses. So it's an absolutely devastating effect in those kinds of epidemics.
So you have this kind of epidemic, and then you have this rush of human beings that have come over from Europe. And have they come over? What was the primary motivation for them coming over there? Was it to seek a better life? Was it gold mining, silver mining? What was the first initial wave?
There are various answers to that. Keep in mind, these are all, initially at least, imperial enterprises. It wasn't just Frenchmen coming over, it was the French government trying to establish an empire that they could profit from. The Spanish, same thing. Now, the English came over, theirs was a combination of governmental ambition and a business enterprise. But in any case, this was all being directed by others in Europe for their own ends. Not the ones who were coming over. They were there, they were trying to do it for their own purposes. That raises the question, so the ones who came over, why were they there? And I think that the most common answer is the one you suggested, better lives. You got to remember, in Europe, especially places like England, land was very scarce. So the possibility of somebody being born into the peasantry or being born, at the lower ranks, the possibility of them acquiring land was beyond remote. And then somebody says, okay, if you'll just go across the Atlantic, we'll give you land. We'll give you a new start. Right. And that's very seductive.
It's fascinating because that pessimism seems to still be prevalent in a lot of English people. This pessimism as far as like your ability to improve your lifestyle.
Yeah.
I've many English friends have come over here and say the attitude in America is that like you can go out and you can forge your own path, you can do things, but in England there's just like they're very dismissive of that.
Yeah. I think there's something to that. Yeah. There is that sort of American spirit.
But the kind of people that would take that kind of chance to get on a boat and go across the ocean with no photographs to look at. I mean, what did they have? A sketch that someone, a story, a tale, a pile of gold that someone had brought back?
Well, they had accounts. They had lies being told to them.
A lot of lies.
But
what were the big lies?
The big lies?
Yeah.
You prosper instantly. There was a very healthy place, great place to raise a family, right? The usual ones. But these, again, they were promoters. They were imperial promoters. They were private promoters. The first English colonies, Jamestown, and then Plymouth, and then Massachusetts Bay. Those are all businesses. They were corporations. It's like Walmart establishing a colony on the moon or something. So they're promoting it. They're trying to persuade people to go there to develop it, to raise tobacco, and to give them their profits. So huge promotional scheme.
Yeah, just the kind of human that did that really sort of establishes the ethic of what it means to be an American, because these are wild, risk-taking people. And these are the people that essentially first established America. I mean, or as far as Europeans. You have to be a wild person to take that kind of a chance.
It's a big chance. But of course, it's always balanced between what appears to be a dead-end life and where they were.
Right.
All immigration, it's sort of a push and pull.
Right, that's the
America had a great pull.
Yeah.
They're also being pushed.
It's also extraordinary that there was this enormous continent, far bigger than Europe, that was available. That that you could go there and establish a new life to. I mean, what a marketing promotion.
Oh yeah. Imagine now. I'm retired now. But I used to tell my classes. Imagine that suddenly the news hits that there is another universe that we didn't know was there. And number two, you could go there. You could actually go there.
Yeah.
What an idea.
Yeah, what a crazy idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, my family came over here in the 1920s from both sides, and they came over from Europe with this idea that America was better than what was available in Italy and Ireland, and that was something that had already been really pretty well established. You go 100 years earlier than that, 200 years earlier than that. These are incredible risks that these people took.
Yeah. They were, and you have to sort of marvel at it. At the same time, ask yourself, would you do that? I don't think so.
Well, yeah, we can look at it from that perspective, marvel at it, but man, from the perspective of the natives that lived here, what a horrific invasion, and what a devastating effect it had on their way of life, their culture, and how much is missing from their cultural memory because of this devastation of 90% of their population.
Yeah. Except for the Black Death. This was the most horrific thing that has ever happened in recorded human history to Indian peoples. Nothing remotely approaches it, except for and even then, when you consider, when you track it over time, we want to play, of course, game of waves, occasional waves. If you look at this as one story over 400 years, it's by itself, nothing more.
It's not only by itself for human beings, but it's also by itself for native wildlife, which is another incredible aspect of this story of American expansion. I watched the Ken Burns documentary on the American buffalo, and you were in that as well.
Yes.
And in that, as well as Stephen Ella. And that is a crazy story, that no wildlife in this country can survive being a commodity. And
it might survive, but it's going to have a real tough time.
Barely,
That's right.
barely.
Yeah.
I mean, we had to put the brakes on it in order for it to survive.
And we were able to put the brakes on it because it was no longer profitable. As long as it's a profitable commodity.
Yeah. AG1 has been helping me feel healthy for years, and if you've been listening to this podcast, this episode is brought to you.
It's in real trouble.
But that also contributed to the demise of Native Americans.
Of course.
particularly the ones who hunted the buffalo.
That's right. Well, not just the buffalo. Buffalo were just the most dramatic example of dozens, scores of species of animals in the New World in North America that were driven to this, either to extinction completely or really close to it. Dan Flores, I think he's been on your show.
Yes, a couple times.
Yeah, Dan has this marvelous new book, Wild New World. It goes into some detail and describes it. And starting with the book, Dan says that at no point in modern history have so many different species been eradicated so quickly.
So quickly.
Yeah, and of course, you made the essential point. What that is, it's not just that they're being hunted and exploited for the profit people are coming into. That's really part of an even larger process. That is the complete transformation of the world. That's one of the things that I try to emphasize in this book. Between 1850 and 1880, the western third of North America was literally remade, ecologically, not just culturally, socially, ecologically. Ecologically, it was made over into a new world. And that world, of course, was not one that native peoples knew how to work. Their existence relied on them being able, relied on centuries of knowledge gained from this intricate understanding of use, sort of choreographed life of this place, relying upon its resources, and also plants, crops and so forth. And the Europeans come in and they just transform it.
Quickly.
Very quickly. So what are you going to do? Well, that is what defeated the Indians. It wasn't the military. It was this transformation of their world into another, one world into another, in which they didn't fit. So they simply had no choice but to do what they were told and live.
Now, when it comes to the American bison, there certainly was a market hunting aspect of it, that they were hunting them for their tongues, they were hunting them for their hides, but there was also, it seems like there was a motivation to remove the Native Americans' ability to sustain themselves. Or was that just a peripheral, was that like...
It's a little complicated, as usual. You're talking about two things here.
Yes.
When you talk about I think it's fair to say that Indian peoples had their own hand in this. What's buffalo robes? That is, you take a usually a cowhide, and you process, you scrape it out, and you work it into a robe. Those became quite popular in the East, in England, in Europe. So it's an exotic thing to have in your house. You're on the wall, you put it into a rug, or you use it as you're out in a carriage in the winter. You would have these things. It was something that was interesting, something that was all of a sudden it was a fashion, kind of a fad, and suddenly there's this great market for these things for Indian hunters, native hunters. They've been killing bison, of course, for their own uses, but now they would do both that and for their hides, which they could turn into robes, which would give them this unprecedented affluence. It was this business boom.
And also warmth and the ability to sustain during winter.
Sure. Well, I mean, they had always used it for that. Now it was a commodity.
When did that shift, and what caused that shift?
That was in the 1820s is when it really booms. Suddenly, there's this exotic thing that you can get from the American West that's kind of cool to have, right? So that's in the 1820s, and it's a huge trade. Hundreds of thousands of robes are sent down the Missouri and the Mississippi down to be marketed out of New Orleans into the cities. That had an early effect on the decline of the bison population. In my own research and work on this, I think that something close to a half of the bison population at its peak is explained by that sort of hunting and other kinds of ecological and environmental changes that were going on in the West. So long before hide hunters, those white hide hunters went out there and started killing them, Indians were killing them. And essentially for the same reason. In other words, Indians themselves became caught up in this commodification, caught up in this international trade, right? And they began to feel the effects of it. By the 1850s, there was this noticeable shortage of bison population, so they're already under pressure. And then somebody figures out, 1872, we know exactly the year, 1872, somebody figures out that you can take a bison hide and you can turn it into industrial leather. In the 1870s, there was a worldwide leather shortage. The reason was industry. Factories needed leather for gaskets, for these machines, belts, these things. A huge demand for it, both here and in England and in Europe. Most of that leather had been coming from Argentina, huge herds in Argentina. But Europe got tapped out. So there's this huge demand, there's this big pressing economic question. Where's the leather going to come from? There's hundreds of new factories being built. Suddenly somebody figures out,
wow.
They can get it.
So the buffalo got it from both sides.
That's right.
Have you read Dan Flores' work on the reason why there was these immense buffalo herds in the first place?
Sure.
He believes that with the decline of the Native American population because of disease, that led to an unprecedented rise in the buffalo. And that when the Europeans came and saw these millions of buffalo on the plain, that this was not normal. That this was something akin to, like, if you go to populations like my neighborhood. My neighborhood is overrun with white-tailed deer. It's crazy how many of them there are. And white-tailed deer at one point in time were on the verge of extinction in the United States, right? Because of market. But that he says that he believes that this insane number of bison that people at first witnessed, that this was because the Native Americans had declined so much there was no pressure on them.
That's a good argument. I think it's very hard to prove. But and I've had that conversation before, and I think there might well be something to it. It's a classic thing. Like Yellowstone, you get rid of the wolves, the elk population booms.
Right. Yeah.
Get rid of predators, the beaver population booms, and all of a sudden all the creeks are dammed and everything else put it. Of course, so it's it's this extraordinarily intricate relationship and connection we have with the world around us. You mess with one part of it, and the rest of it's going to change.
And human beings love to mess with things.
We do, especially.
Yeah, we do. Especially when we came to a place that we didn't really have an understanding of the ecosystem, like North America.
Yeah.
Another thing that Dan talks about that's really fascinating was that horses originated from North America, but were wiped out, but had already been transferred to Europe and to other parts of the world, and then were reintroduced when Europeans came here. What year was that when that started happening?
Well, you're right, of course. They evolved in the southern plains for 50 million years from a critter called a Hyracotherium, which is the size of a collie, into the modern horse. That took millions of years. And fairly late in that story, that is to say only 2 or 3 million years ago, they migrated along with all kinds of other animals. Camels, for example, evolved alongside horses in the southwest. And they made that trip over Thuringia, over the land bridge there.
Bering Strait.
Yeah, into what was the largest pasture on Earth, Central Asia. And their population exploded. And they continued to evolve. They became zebras, headed south into Africa.
That is crazy.
They became asses. So all the equids evolved from those horses coming out of New Mexico. Right?
That is so crazy. The zebras came out of New Mexico.
That's right. Pushing far back enough. That's right.
Wow.
So they boomed over there. But at the end of the last ice age during the Wisconsin, at the end of the Wisconsin glaciation. The world changes. We're going through a kind of a climate change as we have today, warming, and that changes the ecology completely. And all kinds of animals, especially in North America, became extinct. Dozens of species became extinct.
It's like 65% of all North American large megafauna.
Yeah. We had an American lion. We had, of course, saber-toothed tiger, the Smilodon.
American cheetah.
The American cheetah.
Yeah.
We had armadillos the size of Volkswagen Bugs.
Really? Up until when?
With this extinction.
Wow.
And
So
then-
12,000, 13,000 years ago, there's giant armadillos.
That's right.
Wow.
So they would run over cars wouldn't run over them.
Wow.
So, and the list just goes on and on. All of these animals suddenly disappeared because of this, partly because of this ecological change. And there's an argument that it wasn't just that. The question is, okay, the lion goes extinct in America. They didn't go extinct in Africa. Horses go extinct in America. They didn't go extinct over there. There was a global change. So what's the difference? The argument is people. People by that point had just been able to make their way over in the other direction. Thuringia was a two-way street, two-way highway. And animals coming over from Asia at the same time that American animals were going over in the other direction. Buffalo, bison, evolved in the old world, and then they came over here.
Where did they originate from?
Central Asia.
Wow.
And also parts of Europe. There's an animal called auroch that was a descendant also of them.
Were they just as furry? Did they look similar?
Who knows?
Who knows? Maybe they changed.
And they were quite different from the ones today. The ones that came over that dominated were called bison antiquus, or bison latifrons. They were much larger, much larger. Bison antiquus, if you can imagine one now, they have, the bulls have these, the horn spread, just like ours do. The horn spread of a bison antiquus was great enough that LeBron James could lie down between the tips of the horns and not touch you the one.
Wow.
So there were these gigantic bison. They became extinct, and they were then replaced by or followed by our bison, bison americanus. Yeah.
Have you ever read into the Younger Dryas impact theory?
Into the what now?
Younger Dryas impact.
Oh, yeah.
Randall Carlson has been on my podcast multiple times. He's a proponent of that, and there's a lot of scientific evidence in terms of core samples and microdiamonds that seem to indicate around 11,800 years ago, North America and a good 30% of the world was hit when we passed through a comet shower, and that was the end of the ice age, and that it happened not just then, but it happened another time somewhere in the 10,000 range, and that was what melted almost instantaneously most of the North American ice cap that covered half the continent and miles of ice and all that, and that he thinks that was the origin of the mass extinction along with human beings. It was a combination of those two things.
I've heard that idea.
Yeah.
I don't know about it.
I'm trying to bring Randall together with someone who is an expert like Dan Forrest. I'd love to bring Randall and Dan Forrest together so we can compare notes. Both of them are working on the same problem from different angles.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating. And it has to do, of course, with what we were talking about earlier. Human groups. People were here. What effect did that have on them?
Yeah.
Does that explain some of these sudden declines in populations?
Yeah. What's so interesting is we still have some animals left over, like the pronghorn antelope, that moves at speeds that don't make any sense considering the predators that are available. They're so much faster than everything else because they had to evade the North American cheetah.
Yeah, there's a wonderful book called Ghosts of Extinction. And it's exactly what it was. Also, pronghorns can't jump fences.
Right, they go under them.
They go under them or try to go through them, but they can't go over them. And that's because no fences back there.
Right, yeah, pretty
They're
wide.
faster than hell. They can outrun a lion, but they can't jump a fence.
You'd think that something that could run that fast could also jump.
You'd think.
Do you think if we gave them another million years to figure out how to jump fences?
I feel pretty confident they would.
Because white-tailed deer do it like they're born to do it.
Right.
Like a fence to them is just like stepping over a branch.
Oh, I know. We have a place out in the hills in Arkansas. And that's, like you said, they overrun the deer. Yeah.
There's a place called Catalina Island in California where what they're trying to do now is use snipers and helicopters to wipe out the deer population.
No kidding.
Yeah, because they're on an island and there's no predators,
Right.
which is a shame. It's a horrible shame.
They starve.
Yeah, they starve, diseases, CWD, there's a lot of different diseases that they can get hit with because of this overpopulation.
Yeah. And of course, that's the kind of context that you can put in the decline of native peoples here. What we're doing is messing with the ecological arrangement in ways that make it impossible for certain for animals that have adapted to that to survive.
Yeah.
The difference, of course, is that Indians are human beings, and human beings have the imagination to imagine a different way to respond to it in ways that others can't.
What's one of the more fascinating and horrific aspects of the story of the decline of the native population in America is that they had this incredibly unique lifestyle that really wasn't available anywhere else in the world at that time. Most of the rest of Europe and Asia had sort of changed and moved to agriculture and moved to cities. And these people had these immense tribes, super sophisticated hunter-gatherer civilizations that lived in symbiosis with the land. And to us, people that sort of understand how horrible it is that that's happened, we have this incredible romantic attachment to Native Americans.
Yes, one of the ways we do. Now, there was, of course, agriculture here.
Yeah.
In most of the United States, in the East, highly sophisticated forms of agriculture growing a variety of crops. In the Southwest, relying especially on corn. But you're right, a good part of us in the United States, especially the West, the hunter-gatherer peoples and fishers, they have figured out these ways to these sort of incredibly complicated and complex practice ways of moving through their year, month by month, week by week, in ways that they had practiced and learned about over the many generations. That allowed them to really remarkably high standard of living. Now, there were not large tribes. One of the limitations of a hunter-gatherer society is you cannot expand in numbers beyond a certain limit, about 125. Get bigger than that, you really can't support it. So it had was this extraordinary variety of peoples, hundreds of different native groups. Today, there are 530 federally recognized tribes in the United States. Wow. And that's just those are the ones who have survived, physically and culturally. So there's this remarkable array of peoples, many of them speaking different languages or different dialects, all of them in contact with the others in this very intricate trade relationships. It was quite a place, and you're right, it flies. dramatically in the face of what we think was going on back then. This romanticized, simplistic view of the Indian, right? It's just like this one group of people. Right?
It's also so interesting that that number of 125 people aligns with what we know as Dunbar's number.
That's exactly right. That's where it comes from.
Yeah.
So you're aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful book. Yeah.
Yeah, Dunbar's number, meaning that we have in our mind the ability to hold a relationship with a certain number of people intimately, and then as it spreads out further, we can know some people sort of, kind of know of them, but there's just a small group that would be your family, a larger group that would be your tribe, and then there's neighboring tribes.
That's right. That's right. It's a fascinating idea.
It is fascinating.
He uses
It shows a hard drive.
Yep.
We have a mental hard drive that's sort of designed.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, he uses it's a great book. He uses the idea of gossip. You know, the maximum number in which gossip really affects you. Right? You can't get above about 125 for that.
Well, it is interesting because it seems like there's a biological, maybe an evolutionary reason for gossip.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And in those societies, it played a very important role because these groups typically had nothing remotely like our system of authority. Essentially, nobody was in charge. Among many Western groups, no person in a particular band could tell another person to do anything. No one had that kind of authority.
Right.
So how do they stop people from being nuts, doing horrible things? It's groups of bands of opinion. Machine.
Right.
They often have these characters sort of like town criers. Somebody would do something awful and he would walk through the camp yelling about it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So but that, of course, is just sort of gossip on a grand scale.
Right, someone's hiding food.
Yeah.
Someone's being greedy.
And what's interesting also about Dunbar, I'm sure you remember this one from his book, when you get down below 125, smaller groups, there's also groups in which there's a certain intimacy where you can absolutely trust these people. Right. What's that number? 12. Think of it, 12 jurors, 12 disciples.
Right. Yeah.
11 in the football team.
Yeah.
Close to it.
Right.
It's a smaller group that works because everybody knows everybody else. Everybody is rely on each other. So, yeah, and you say it's hard work.
Yeah.
That's how we work.
Well, that's one of the things that's fascinating about things like the Battle of Little Big Horn, because the Native American groups had figured out, listen, we got to get together. The only way we're going to stop these invaders is if we band together and form a much larger group.
Yeah, those are the tribes. Most importantly, there, the Lakota, the Western Sioux, and the Northern Cheyenne. They were all, again, composed of bands. There was no tribes. All of them broke down into these smaller units. And they recognized the kinship. They spoke the same or common, highly related languages, so they intermarried, sort of bonded together. But about that time, as you say, at the time, 1876, 1870s, there was this realization, we got a real problem here. We got a real problem here. And the best shot we have is for us to overcome these, the sense of common identity and common purpose. It's a kind of rise of what you might call nationalism, Sioux, Cheyenne nationalism, and that's new. That's new. That wasn't there before. So they're evolving, right? They're evolving in their understanding. They're evolving in how they think about it themselves, right? It's this world in constant motion and change. And what fascinated me about this in this book was how complex it was and how fast it was and how completely far-reaching it was. Everything changes.
Quickly.
Yeah.
One of the fascinating stories about Little Bighorn was that this band, this banding together of all these natives, didn't last. They were very effective. This one battle. Very quickly. Like they said that the battle lasted somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 minutes?
Well, sort of the height of it, where Custer's Park, that's probably about that, or maybe a little longer.
It's crazy.
Now, the battle itself, of course, the larger battle lasted much longer, or more than a day, about 2 days. As he's part of the command under Reno retreated to this hill, and was besieged and held under siege for a day and a half. That's right. And then, that's a great victory.
Yeah.
Problem is, you know what's going to happen. Right? You know what's going to happen.
They knew the retaliation was coming.
Yeah, big time. You got to remember now, when did this happen? It was 1876. The battle itself was on June 25th, 1876. Like I say, they were under siege there for 2 or 3 days. It was another few days before the first other group of the army, of the cavalry, arrived. Then they had to spend a few days taking care of the wounded, doing what they can. Then they took the survivors to the Missouri River to get on a steamboat to head down to the Bighorn. And it was at that point that the news began to travel about this unprecedented defeat by American forces. So the battle's on June 25th. Put all those days together. When do you think the first news arrived of this catastrophe? July 4th. July 4th, 1876, the 100th anniversary of the approval of the Declaration of Independence, our 100th birthday. News arrives of this crushing catastrophe. The nation, the military, was not going to let that stand. So this was part of the reason that there was this extraordinary effort to destroy these people. So they very quickly broke up into these constituent bands and tried to get away as best they could. And less than a year, they were defeated.
And you talk about what happened after that in your other book on the Nez Perce, the last Indian War.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That was the next year, 1877. The Nez Perce were just extraordinary people in the Pacific Northwest. They were from Idaho, from eastern Oregon. They too, composed of these different bands, gathered together in this one common identity, the Ninipu, which means the real people. And they were completely at peace with the whites. In fact, Lewis and Clark had been the first Americans, the first white people that they had ever seen. Lewis and Clark came over the Little Pass, they were starving, and the Nez Perce took them in, saved them, helped them get some horses and canoes to keep on their way. And on the way back, Lewis and Clark stayed with them more than a month. And they formed, in the eyes of the Nez Perce, they formed this alliance with the Americans. They swore, from this time on, we're friends, we're allies. You help us when we fight, we'll help you when you fight. and that was in 1806. They kept that promise from 1806 until 1877.
Wow.
As their land was being overrun, as these appalling trees were being forced upon them, kept their word. And then finally in 1877, the government said, okay, that's enough, you got to come into this reservation. And the ones who were living off of it had to then, within 1 month, they had to pack up everything. They had to leave their homeland that they had known for generations. They had to cross the Snake River at its highest point, somehow get their families, women, children, kids, old folks, across this river to gather, to go into this reservation, into the way of life. Even though the treaty that required them to do that was far. And on the eve, literally the day before they were to go onto the reservation, be forced on the reservation, these young men sort of snapped. And these young men took off and killed a bunch of folks that they had grudges against. That then triggered this war, triggered this larger outbreak against whites. That then, of course, brought the army in, and the army tried to put this down. But as I researched that book, the question I kept coming back to was, why? Why did they do that? Because at the time of the war, they were completely at peace with the Americans around them. They had adapted beautifully. They were prosperous cattlemen. They were raising cattle. You know? They had silver tea sets, for Pete's sake. They were more prosperous than the whites who were living in the area. They threatened no one. They were living on lands that the whites didn't want. Why force them in? What's the reason? And the only reason I can think of was a little bit more. This year before, this humiliating defeat at the hands of the Lakotas and the Cheyennes. With that, the government said, okay, that's it. Everybody, even our best friends, have to give up. And they have to come in the reservations where we will control them.
This episode is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Have you ever gotten undressed only to realize you were in front of an open window? How did that make you feel? Exposed? Vulnerable? Well, going online without using ExpressVPN is like being naked in front of a floor-to-ceiling window. That's because your internet provider can see and record everything you do online. Your internet provider like AT&T or Verizon can see every website you visit, and they're legally allowed to sell your browsing activity to third parties without your consent. But it's not just internet providers. If you They'll control them and force Christianity on them as well.
Yeah.
Have you seen Taylor Sheridan's series 1923? It's a prequel to Yellowstone. Have you ever watched any of those shows?
No.
Really good show. One of the things that 1923 documents, it stars Harrison Ford, and it's very interesting. It documents these women that are forced from their tribe to go into these schools where their Christianity is forced upon them. They're beaten and treated horrifically. It's very hard to watch because you know that is what happened.
Of course, yeah. It's a boarding school.
Yeah.
It goes way back before 1923. By 23, it's sort of winding down. But yeah, all sorts of course scandalous news recently, in the past year or two, about the kinds of treatment that came out of those schools. Here in Canada, the same sort of thing is being revealed in Canada about the abuses under those schools. Yeah. It's not just Christianity that's being forced on. They are required to speak only English. They're punished if they speak their own languages.
Yeah.
They give up their appearance, cut their hair, dress in a certain way. Now, there's a wonderful irony in that show. I said a moment ago, most people in the public think of the Indian as if there's one group of people.
Right.
the Indian. Native people, of course, didn't think at all like that. They identify with tribal groups. They identify with the band within the tribal groups. Often at odds with each other, and fighting each other like everybody fights everybody else in history. So their identity was, when you say, what are you? They would say, well, I'm a Cheyenne, I'm a Comanche, I'm a Tlingit, whatever. I belong to this guy's band. So the idea of the Indian was completely foreign until boarding schools. And all of a sudden, boarding schools, all the kids, all the young people are required to go to these schools. All of these different groups, they're all living together. They're all forced to surrender much of their own individual cultures. There's dozens of different cultures that they come from. And suddenly it begins to dawn on them. They're now all speaking the same language, right? They're all, we've got much more in common than we have differences among us. So there's a way in which the supposed purpose of a boarding school was to destroy Indianness. The famous phrase coming from Colonel Pratt, who was the one who founded Carlisle, was kill the Indian to save the man. So destroy Indian identity in order to allow these people to survive in the modern world.
Wow.
But what the boarding schools did was, in fact, create the Indian. They didn't kill the Indian. The Indian didn't exist before that. It created the sense of common identity. The sense of, okay, we may be Comanche, we may be Cheyenne, we may be Lakota, maybe whatever, but we all have this common problem we're facing, these common difficulties. So we need to think in terms of the Indian, to bind together. Just like on a smaller scale, when these bands decide to join and unite in order to fight the military. Now on this much larger continental scale, Indians from all over, Native peoples from all over the nation, now begin to see that they are related in their circumstances. So the Indian was created, not killed, in boarding schools.
That's fascinating. When they initially tried to move the natives to reservations, were they doing it because where the natives were, there was valuable resources? Were they doing it because geographically they could control them better in these regions? Like, what was the motivation initially?
It was all of that, yeah. Certainly they were, especially when they're in particular places that are very rich in resources. Great examples, of course, mining wishes. These people who were, again, hunter-gatherers, living in some place, in this remote mountain area of California, suddenly they're overrun. These people are coming in, overrun because they are living on some of the richest places in the nation. So you got to get rid of them, right? But there's also the reason this is a way to control them, and to, in the eyes of the government, to transform them. Right? Put them on these reservations, and you can turn them into the kind of people that you want them to be. Make them American. So it's both of those things together.
Which is historic. Like when we look back at it now, it's like one of the most horrific aspects of it. We just try to eliminate and just integrate them into our culture.
Right. That was always the formal government goal.
It wasn't simply give them a place to live the way they live.
No, virtually no one was saying that. Even the people who were called, for the formal term, Friends of the Indians, or organization called Friends of the Indians, And they were, honestly, in their own hearts, they thought that they were doing what was necessary for the best for these people. But it's just, they said the only way we can do that, the only way that these people can be saved, is to transform them into people like us, to make them into our, integrate them into our culture. And that in a number of basically three things. They had from farmers. From the beginning of this country, that's sort of the ideal life. That's how you begin your integration into the economy, the Jeffersonian vision, the ideal farmer. You got to be Christian. You have to have this common religion and education. You've got to take their young people and you've got to put them in schools where they will be not only learn the basics of 3 R's and so forth, but they'll be culturally educated. They'll be culturally transformed. So these boarding schools were meant to transform these people into Americans. So you often hear the term genocide thrown around, and there are times in American history when that was absolutely true, when there was an effort to simply eradicate Indian peoples. But the whole reservation system was not meant for that. Sometimes it turned out that way. The purpose of it was this control and transformation. That's what was supposed to happen. And then when that happened, once that was done, the reservations would be done away with, everybody would live in harmony.
Wow.
It didn't happen, of course.
It had to be so confusing to them what the resources were that the white man wanted too. Because they're like, why do you want gold? You can't eat it. You can't use it as a weapon. Yeah. So strange.
It is. In a lot of ways it is. Gold, as you said, it's virtually useless. It's very soft. Right?
Yeah.
So you can't make it into
a strange thing to be the most valuable of all commodities.
It's really shiny.
But how bizarre that so many parts of the world agreed upon that.
Just cross-culture, across hundreds of years. The Egyptians.
Yeah.
The Egyptians called gold the breath of God. The Aztec considered God's skin. This is the extraordinary gods.
So strange.
So strange. Yeah. That's not true. I think that once, there's work's going on right now by Mr. Benjamin Manley, who is studying in California. In the gold rush, there were Indians who said, "Oh, we don't get any much stuff in this stuff."
Of course,
and so they went to work, and there were hundreds of Indians in the gold fields before the 49ers came.
Really? Yeah. That was another interesting thing about your discussion, Steve Renella, that we think of the 49ers as the miners, but they were 48ers. Right. And they were from a variety of different countries.
That's right.
Tasmania?
Yeah. Australia.
Yeah. Wild.
All parts of Asia. Yeah. Remember the gold was discovered in the American River on January 24th, 1848. So 3 weeks into 1848. The word then began to leak out, made it to San Francisco, and slowly, gradually, so now 1848, it takes a long time for news to get from California to the east.
How did it primarily get there? Was it?
Well, there was, it was traffic back and forth. It was very slow, over the trails, over
right.
So forth.
Months and months.
And when it came to the east, a lot of people said, "Oh, come on, no, one more rumor about riches in the west." But it wasn't until December 4th, 1848, when the president, James Polk, in his annual message to Congress, said, "Yep, it's true. It's true. Wow. They found gold out there, and there's a lot of it. A lot of it, and people are making thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars out there." But the point here is that from January 1848, when gold was discovered, to the end of 1848, nobody in the East really either knew about this or were rumors or believed it. So that's why we call the gold rushers 49ers, because it's the next year that they go out there in these extraordinary numbers. But the question is, what was happening out there at the time? Right? What was happening is we had the 48ers, people from Oregon, people from Australia, people from Tasmania, the first Chinese, especially people from the South, Sonorans, people coming from Mexico, Peruvians, Chileans. So when the 49ers get out there, the Americans get out there, and they look around, they need our gold.
Right.
So it's what I call the second conquest of California. The first, of course, in the War of Mexico. But then suddenly, this is the richest place on earth, quite literally, at that time. And it's being, the gold there is being mined by these people that we consider non-Americans. Gotta get rid of them. Indians, right? The rest of them, there's what's called the Chile War, in which Chileans are driven out of the islands. So these people are either driven out completely or they're confined to the edges, while the 49ers take over, including, of course, the Indians. This is what triggered one of the few cases in which this is clearly genocide, in which there was a concerted, formal effort to eradicate Indian peoples who were on these gold fields. The California legislature funded bond issues to pay for militias to go kill Indians. Congress reimbursed California, the legislature, to pay for those expeditions. It was what Manley wrote the Pico Congress, called the killing machine. One of the few times in American history when we can say absolutely, yes, this is a template.
Yeah, specifically because of the commodity.
Sure, of course. Remember, this was by far the richest gold discovery in human history of the time. More gold was mined in California in 1 year, 1852.
Yo, what's up, man? Dude, I've tried to play Valorant. It's too slow for me. Maybe when I get older, I'll like it better or something. Yeah, bro. I'd probably be playing the finals right now if it was still going. I'm glad they have servers for you though, because whenever it comes back, it's gonna be sick. I liked it a lot, dude. I think the game is gonna be good. I hope that there's a lot of investment into pro play, because I think that game's gonna be sick, and it's gonna be fun to watch too. It's really good.
That had been mined across the world in the entire 18th century.
Wow.
It's a story from the fellow who was the head of the San Francisco Mint that was established in the mid-1850s. He said that at one time they were processing so much gold in that mint that the furnaces couldn't handle it, and they discovered to their horror, gold dust was being blown out of the smokestacks and settling on the area around there. So they had to send out people for like a quarter mile around the Mint to sweep up the gold on the,
Sift through it.
on the roofs,
Wow.
the gilded rooftops.
Wow.
So this is a lot of gold.
That's
right?
insane.
And one result of that was that California, of course, is this instant population. It never goes through a territorial period. It's just a straight state because of so many people, right?
The game's
Well,
awesome, bro.
Historically, if
like
Indians
it
were
a
getting
lot.
much of a protection, it came from the federal government. Well, the federal government has, it's not a territory. So it's part of the state government. State government, state government said, get rid of it. And the population dropped from estimated 150,000 in 1848 to 1900, 16, 100, so about 90%. Yeah, you can picture it this way. I think you mentioned to most folks, where are the great Indian wars? Where are the great Indian defeats? They think typically of the Great Plains, or the Bighorn, Montana, Dakotas, and the Southwest, New Mexico, Arizona. That's where the movies all are.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that we're most aware of publicly. If the population...
Mic is quiet. Appreciate you telling me. Give me a second. Testing. Test. I don't know if you can hear that, but sorry if you can. Test. Testing. Test. I think maybe one of the plugins reset or something. Oh, no, I know what happens. Okay. Yeah, I don't know why. Sometimes I appreciate you telling me. I don't know why, but sometimes yeah, I don't know why, but sometimes Windows will reset the input volume of the mic randomly, and so it was 25% lower than it normally is. And normally every time, like I have my gain on my interface, like I don't fucking touch that shit. So whenever something, this has happened a few times before where my mic volume will be a lot lower, and I don't know why. It's normally, like, I can tell it's a software thing because I don't fucking touch my gain knob at all. But yeah, I appreciate you telling me. I'm gonna test it one more time. Testing, test. Hello, testing. All right. Yeah, I don't know why Windows does that, but it'll just reset my fucking gain for some reason. I don't know why.
In California, native population in California, dropped as much as we think it did. That would be as if every native person in Montana, North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, vanished. As if they were all gone, all dead.
Wow.
And that was happening in this one state.
One state because of one command.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was an absolute nightmare. And yet who knows about it?
Very few.
Who's aware of it?
Yeah, that's not really understand that much. There's a fantastic book about Texas and about the Comanches called Empire of the Summer Moon.
Sure.
Have you read it?
Yeah.
Incredible book. It details the difficulty that they had in trying to establish colonies, both in New Mexico and in Texas, because of the Comanches. And sure, that is an absolutely amazing documentation of what took place in this area.
Yeah. Part of that story has to do with what we were talking about earlier, and it is horses.
Yes.
This was one of the great revolutions. I call it the other American Revolution. In the book, I call it the Grass Revolution. The horses now, of course, started here, went to Asia, became extinct here, and the Europeans brought them back. Coronado was the first to bring them into where they had been born, on the South Plains.
What year was this?
Coronado,
Yeah.
1540s, in the 1540s. And then the Spanish came for good at the end of the 1500s, establishing Santa Fe along the Rio Grande River. They brought horses. And then it wasn't until around 1680 that this rebellion of Pueblo Indians in the Santa Fe area drove the Spanish out for 12 years, that these horses began to spread across the West. Now, they had begun to spread before, and we're coming to understand now that there was probably more than out there than we realized, earlier than we realized. But the explosive growth of horses out of New Mexico comes after 1680. 1780, 100 years later, Indian peoples across the plains in the southwest and in the Rocky Mountains have all developed, adapted the horse, adopted to that horse into what we call horse cultures. That is, these ways of life that depend upon the horse. Without the horse, you can't do what we have a car culture. Right? And this gave them, among other things, great military power, economic power, and also military power. The key to that was the fact that horses are herbivores, right? And they're adapted to this second largest grassland on Earth, the Great Plains. And when you put a human on a horse, then it becomes something else. It bemes what I call a horseman, and it's horse hyphen man. Not a horseman. It's like you take these two animals and you fuse them into one thing. Right? And this animal, like a centaur, and this animal has power, and speed, and grace, and the beauty of a running horse. And it has the brain of a human being. It has the imagination and the innovation and the arrogance of a human being. That's a new animal. It's bad news for the bison. Really bad news for the bison. First time you have a grass-eating predator. You have a killer. You have a killer that can draw upon the same energy of the grasses as the bison. And it's both fatal and forward. At the same time, it becomes these horse cultures become extraordinary military machines. And that's what the Comanches are. That's what they're about. And that was the start of the American Revolution. At the same time that our revolution in the East is going on, there's this revolution in life and power in the middle of West United States for the rise of these native empires. The Comanches, the Dakotas, and others become the sort of superpowers. They dominate the middle of America. And just kick the jabbers out of the Spanish. Yeah. It's not until the Americans show up with their numbers, overwhelming numbers, and with their new technologies, the pistol and the rifles, the railroads, and the others, that they're able to find that these empires are broken. And of course, the Big Horn, that's the end of that particular cycle. And there were Dakotas who, they were the superpowers of the middle of America. They and the Comanches were these formed in effect one great empire, stretched from southern Canada all the way into Mexico, the native empire. Right? That's what we broke when we came in with the Little Bighorn in 1876 against the Comanches, what that book writes about, 1874. It was also the last time that a horse culture arose on Earth. The first was about 5,000 years ago in Ukraine. And then, of course, that way of life spreads across Central Asia, the Mongols. It spreads into northern China. It spreads down into the Mideast. It leads to the great horseback empires of the Arabs in northern Europe. And then into Europe to the great Iberian powers like Spain. All of these are military horse cultures. A story that goes 5,000 years back. And it ends where the story began 15 million years ago, with the beginning of the first horses. Right? It ends at the same place. What you see when you look at the Little Bighorn, when you look at the defeat of the Comanches, when you look at the defeat of the Southern Tribes, what you're seeing is the end of a 5,000-year epic in world history. An epic that began at the same place.
It's incredible. So the horse empire began in Ukraine?
The first time we know it, you think now. The first time people domesticated horses was in Ukraine, yeah.
That's so fascinating. Yeah. How did they figure it out? And how did the Comanche figure out how to do it so much better than the other tribes?
That's a good question. There have been some very good books written recently on the Comanches. The best, in my opinion, is by called The Comanche Empire. It follows the story. It's a good friend of mine, Pekka Hamalainen. He's a native Finn who has written the great book on this. I don't know. They just, first place, I think Dan Forrest would stress this. They were in absolutely the right place. Southern Plains. And there's a book called Horizontal Yellow, which is the Comanche word for this area. This is where horses evolved. This is where they were born. This is where they were best adapted. And the Comanche, that was the Comanche, so they were just the right place for this generation of horses. And they took advantage of it. Something about them was able to fashion, to take advantage of it to a degree that a few others did. They were very, very good. And what Pekka's book does also show that this was genuine empire. They had their own foreign policy. They had their own economic system. They had these intricate trade systems that they sort of outsource the growing of horses. They would, when the Americans came, they would wait until the Americans were developing horse herds, as well as cattle and other things. Let them do the work. Let them use their grass to develop these horse herds, and then we see them. So they're outsourcing, right? Wow. They develop these trade networks of trading horses up to the northern plains, where the winters are so severe. They have terrible losses over there. Selfish trade up to the northern plains. Very sophisticated arrangement. But they were the masters. It served them well until the Americans show up in numbers.
They figured out how to geld stallions, they figured out how to raise them, and the amount of status and wealth that you have depends upon the amount of horses.
Sure.
Which is very different
from what you had before. Yeah, that was quite common among other groups of these horse cultures. The horse became sort of the coin of the realm, as you said. Who you were, it was like big wigs, right?
Yes.
The bigger the wig you had, the bigger. That's what I'm saying. The more horses you have, that's a measure of your wealth, of your status, prestige.
This area that we're in right now was populated by the Comanche, and these arrowheads are one of them. They're everywhere. I mean, they're everywhere. Yep. There's a friend of mine who has a ranch out here, and he finds hundreds, thousands of them a year. Yep. And he actively sifts through them, and he puts them up on his website and his Instagram page. And this is just one of who knows how many, if not hundreds of thousands of these that have been found in this area. But these people lived for a long time, just surviving off the buffalo and wild game, and primarily eating only meat, which gave them a big advantage over the Americans who came here and needed carbohydrates, and who they couldn't go a day or two without eating, without being completely diminished. Whereas their body had adapted to eating meat. They were essentially ketosis, and they were eating meat, and it didn't bother them to go a day without food. They had all these advantages.
Yep. beautifully adapted, partly by their own planning, partly just good chance.
Yeah, and also their strategies, their ability. We think of Native Americans, we think of archers as having a quiver on their back, and they pull an arrow from the quiver and put it in. They carried multiple arrows in each finger. So the 4 fingers of the hand, they would have 4 arrows sitting in their hands, ready to go, and they have the ability to cycle them through the bow very quickly. Whereas the Europeans had a musket, and they had to put the ball in there and the gunpowder and tap it down. And the whole thing took like 30 seconds to get one shot off under extreme pressure of these Native Americans who were extremely adept on horseback and who actually would ride sideways, so they would hide behind the body of the horse.
Right, yeah.
Which is incredible.
Now, by the time the real hammer came down, the whites had repeating rifles and they had pistols. But still, in terms of fighting on those terms, the Comanche on horseback was far more effective. Most were called short bows, and they were very powerful. We think of longbows, crossbows, very powerful. They could hunting bison, and they could shoot an arrow on these short bow arrows under these short bows, and it would go through a bison. And they're incredibly accurate.
Yeah, and
Even
very
on
accurate.
horseback, yeah.
Riding horseback, they trained to shoot off of horseback. Like the Mongols famously would release their arrow while the horse was in the air because of the less disturbance. So they had this thing that they would do where they would release the arrow as the horse was in the air. And they were insanely accurate doing it that way. Apparently not very accurate doing it just standing still. That was alien to them. Like, why would you shoot on the ground like that? That's so stupid. You know, a horse dummy.
Yeah.
Well, what was documented in Empire of the Summer Moon was the use of the revolver, and that the military didn't really have a desire to acquire the revolver, but the Texas Rangers did. And the reason why they did is they recognized that there's a need to have multiple bullets in some sort of cylinder that you could replace. And so when they started doing that, that's when they started to gain ground over the Comanche. And then, of course, the Henry rifle, the repeating rifle, all these different things that happened after that.
Yeah. Revolvers are not terribly accurate. They could fire bullets as fast as Comanche could fire arrows. So that's an advantage.
Yeah, and Jack Hayes, who's the original Texas Ranger, photo of them out there in our lobby, as well as a photo of Cynthia Ann Parker.
So, and
Quanah
Quanah
Parker. Yeah, it's just such an amazing aspect of the history of this area. I mean, in this region, when you drive around, you'll see like Quanah Parker Lane, you'll see like all these Comanche names that have been put on streets.
Yeah, well, Cynthia was taken not far from here.
Right.
11 years old.
Yeah, it's a crazy story, right?
It's an amazing story.
Yeah, this whole place transformed so rapidly, and it's interesting that the sort of independent philosophy of Texans probably had a lot to do with how difficult it was to take over this place.
Yeah, I think you can push that a little too far, but there's certainly something to that. Awfully tough people.
How could you push it too far? What do you mean?
Well, I think that some of the people in Texas and elsewhere, they were just sort of ordinary folks, and they really didn't have to go through the kind of transformation, kind of a didactic transformation that would produce those kinds of abilities. But the ones on the cutting edge, the ones out there, that was true of them.
Yes.
Tough guys. Charlie Goodnight, you know that name?
Yes.
Charles Goodnight, yeah. Good example of that. Yeah. Tough guy. His partner, Oliver Loving, was killed by Comanches in West Texas. He had to go through some serious stuff. Goodnight did, and others at that time to make it.
Did the Comanches have a reservation?
Not as such. There were, at the very end of this, right before it all fell apart, they were on sort of government land had been set aside far north Texas, the border of Oklahoma, stayed on that, but it didn't last. The animosity, the unalloyed hatred, mutual hatred between Comanches and Texas, sorry to exaggerate it, it was just Palestinians and Israelis, Hamas and Israelis just could not reconcile it. And so the government was trying to give these folks a chance to become farmers and the rest of it. So they put them on this piece of land. But the Texans kept at them. And finally they said, enough of that. We're going back to Panhandle. So besides that, Texas has only a couple of reservations by the end of the story. One in East Texas. The reason is, of course, that these hostilities between Texans and Indians is so extreme that they're either all Indians or they're all killed or driven out.
Which is so extraordinary when you think about the expanse of their empire.
Yeah. It's just sort of the purging, ethnic cleansing.
When you set out to write a book this vast, and it seems like there's so much information that it's got to be a daunting task to try to figure out how to pull it all together.
Yeah, that was by far the biggest problem. I think I was very naive when I started I look back and you're going to do what? Because, as I've already said a couple of times, this 30-year period when so much happens all over the place, so fast, in so many ways, so many changes, all of them bouncing off each other, all of them influencing each other. It's just this bewildering series of things, of events. And the hardest part of any book. One of my friends told me the hardest thing about writing a book is making a book. You're making one thing, as opposed to just a whole series of note cards put together. But that was beyond hard for this. It had come up with some way to fit it together with a narrative, an arc of time, with themes that hold it together. And I did my best to do that, but that was by far the hardest part of it.
Yeah, did you do this independently? Did you have a contract to do a book?
Oh, it's part of a series, the History of the West series, University of Nebraska series, and we're about finished with it now. But beyond that, it was independent.
It would have to be. Otherwise, the pressure on you to get this done, the deadlines. It's like, what are you doing, Elliot? What kind of book is this?
Well, I've told him before. It's done, but it's done.
Well, it must be so hard to put together something that is put into perspective today. Imagine that kind of change happening from 1993 to 2023. Yeah. Put that in your head and imagine. The world changes.
The world is made over. It's made over. The thing that I came up with, the closest thing I had to tie together was something really big happens in this country in the second half of the 19th century. And we all recognize that. Any American historian will agree with that. And what happens is the narrative of this country, the basic story of the United States, shifts onto a new track. We're changing all the time, of course, but sometimes things really change. And this is one of them. When this American story moves in a new direction, it would carry it into what we think of as modern America, carry it into the America where we know the 20th and the 21st centuries. If you go back, if you look at a time machine in Toro Dial, go back to like 1850. Before that, you're in another world.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for us to identify with. 1900, we're industrialized. We're tied to the world in new ways. We're technologically far more sophisticated. We're people much more of a polyglot nation. The whole idea of citizenship, of who is an American, all that has changed. It happens during that period. Well, if you, all American stories agree with that. If you were to ask them, how do you explain that? What accounts for this shift? The most common answer to that, by far, up until now, has been the Civil War. The Civil War, establishes the primacy of the federal government. The Civil War expands citizenship to emancipation. The Civil War helps the ode to us to industrialize, to turn into this modern economic superpower. It's all true, undeniable. What I argue in this book is that expansion in the 1840s, the discovery of gold, which comes exactly at the same time, and what happens in the West during these 30 years, from 1850 to 1880, those things are as important as the Civil War in helping us understand how we became modern, in the making of modern America. Expansion, those 30 years of incredible changes, were as important as the Civil War in turning us into a modern industrial power, and expanding citizenship, in this case not just free people, Indians, Hispanics, Chinese, in strength of the power of the federal government, which takes on all kinds of new responsibilities because of the West. National parks to the Department of Interior, outward looking into the world. It's because of this happening that what I call the reorientation of America. We turn into the Pacific. We become a Pacific-facing nation as well as an Atlantic-facing nation. We began to move into what we know today as a people who are looking continuously across the Pacific to China, to the other nations. All those things that we associate with being modern have as much to do with expansion as to do with the Civil War. So the basic idea is you cannot possibly understand America as the America that we know from the 20th and 21st centuries without looking at this story, without taking into account what follows from the acquisition of 1,200,000 square miles over 3 years and what happened following that.
It's just, without books like this, I think people have sort of this abstract notion of what took place here. They know horrible things happened. They know Native American population was wiped out. They know they were forced into reservations. But I don't think it's being taught enough to most Americans, the actual history of this land and how extraordinary this change was.
Yeah.
That's a brave responsibility you had to put down this one massive book.
Yeah. Well, of course, I could not agree more. We can't know who we are as Americans unless you take this into account, and unless you get beyond the sort of the mythic, romanticized view that we have of that, and recognize it as this is the birth of modern America.
Yeah.
Just as going on east and west, of course. But the point of the title is it's a continental story.
Yes.
It's a story that has to be told and understood from coast to coast.
There's also a very bizarre aspect of our understanding of the West that has to do with the narratives that are shaped in film.
Sure.
I mean, we have this whole genre of film in America called westerns, which is really interesting, right? Because we have spaghetti westerns that are actually made in Italy, which Clint Eastwood, all these films that detail these heroic Americans who fight off the Indians. And our narrative is the people that are on the wagon train, they're just trying to have a good life, and they're getting attacked by the Indians. We have to fight off the Indians. We have this very sort of myopic view. It's weird, right?
It is weird.
Yeah, our view of what happened in terms of what's been depicted in film and in books, it's very simplistic.
Kidding.
Yeah, right?
It is. And it's a great question about why that is.
Yeah.
For 40 plus years, I taught a course called The West of the Imagination, which wrestles with exactly that question. What is it about Western history that is so, what is it sort of compels us to take this story of the West and to turn it into this simplistic, romanticized story? It's a great question.
It's a revisionist history question, right?
Well, it is.
Yeah.
And I think there are various ways to approach it. The most basic way is simply, in a way, sort of restates the question by saying that there's something about the West, and this goes way back to European history, even before Columbus. Something about the direction of the West that invites us to imagine new worlds.
Yeah. Right.
People living in Europe, the one direction in which they knew absolutely nothing was west. You look into the Atlantic, and so they were able to imagine all these wonderful myths. There's something about that. There's something that sort of carries through on that. But in particular, in this country, people need the West to be something. It's their need that produces the story. It's not what's happening. We need to make the West into what we need. We need the West to be what we require in this particular time. So, for instance, after the Civil War, this country is trying to remake itself into one nation. We're trying to heal these wounds, stitch the nation back together. We need stories about what we have in common, whether you live in South Carolina or whether you live in Pennsylvania. What do we have in common? Well, one thing we have in common is we're conquering the West. In this together. All Americans. It's a heroic, very positive American view. Story. In that story, among other things, we've got to earn our way into this country. That means we've got to suffer. Okay. So all these things, suffering pioneers, but also, of course, the threat of Indians, or the coming threat of Indians. That's a heroic American story. And we've got to bleed our way into full possession. Don't bother me with the complications of this Indian country. This is their country. Don't bother me with the fact that they're trying to defend their land. They're not trying to kill people.
Right.
That doesn't matter. We need this to be a very virile story. Reflect the image of this American nation is really coming into its own.
Yes, the heroic, rugged individualist who makes his way across the country.
That's right.
Not wholesale genocide for resources.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it becomes a very male story.
Yes.
All of these stories of railroad, these railroaders trying to protect themselves against the Indians. Very the idea of a violent West, these shootouts every day, that reflects a kind of virility to the whole story. So, in other words, I think there's a metaphor like this. What's your movie, right? Any movie. You sit there in the theater, and you're watching this thing up on the screen, and you're tricking yourself thinking it's on the screen. It's behind you. It's the projection. So there's a way in which we turn the West into this thing that in fact, outsiders are projecting onto it what they want it to be.
Yeah.
That's what Western's
Do you think it's a part of a guilt of a real understanding of what really took place?
I don't know. I don't know people.
Because it's so romanticized. It seems like there should have been one genocidal film made about the American West. The knowledge was there.
Yeah. You said a moment ago, everybody, you stop folks on the street, everybody agrees Indians were poorly treated.
Yes.
Right? But hey, it's eggs broken for a national omelet, right?
Right, and it's also, it wasn't me. I wasn't there.
That's right.
You know, I'm a child of immigrants came here in the 20s. I have no
And you are.
responsibility.
Well, and you are. You know, it's not a matter of guilt so much as it a matter of recognizing this is our story.
This is the actual events.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Nobody's going to pressure you to feel guilty about it.
And we're never going to learn unless we actually know what happened. Sure. I mean, there's no, it's too easy to, the term's whitewash. Because it really is whitewash, right? In this case, literally.
Literally.
Yeah, it's too easy to whitewash the actual events that took place.
Yeah. And it could be an oddly ugly story. But it's also, I think we can also make the mistake of painting it in these sort of starkly tragic occasional genocide terms. There is absolutely something to the point of view that these were just ordinary people going out there trying to make
Right.
how about my early passion for socialism, which is everything. So these people who went out there, took off solar farm or whatever, picked up and got bored or something. Why are they doing it? And I've read hundreds of letters and diaries, journals, memoirs, and I've yet to find one example of somebody saying, "Well, tell you what, it's gonna be tough out there, but we gotta go out there and get rid of the Indians."
Right.
They got these images of who the Indians were and what sort of danger they had. But they're not there to get up their farm.
Right.
Out there to make a better life. That's the American story. But in doing that, I said earlier, in doing that, they took part in this effort, took part in this complete transformation of this world that destroyed the Indian life. Made it impossible for the Indians to live what they had.
When you're writing something like this, it must be an overwhelming responsibility to accurately relay this message to people.
Sure. Yeah, that's what stories do.
And that's probably why it took 20 years, right?
That's right. I looked at a lot of stuff, right? Yeah, it took me a long time to research it. And I also try to make it as much as I can a human story. I try to get what I say in there, give it a story with some bodiness, a sense of what it was like for individuals out there. And that means you make it very complicated. There are no simple moral messages, as much as we'd like them to be. It's not. That's part of the accuracy. I also try to respect. It's important. I have this romanticized view out there. Particular things like cowboys, cattle drives, right? Homesteaders. Well, the fact is, those are the stories that fascinate us. And I try to honor that fascination. Those were great stories. Great stories over the trails. These names, walking 1,500 miles out there. Those are great stories. So, miles of cowboys, cattle drives, all the rest of that. Those fascinate us for good reason, because they're fascinating. What I try to do is to respect that fascination. At the same time, I'm trying to tell those stories as fully as I can. With as much nuance as I can to bring in new understanding. To point out, for example, in ranching, who knew that the great ranching empires, the Great Plains, were run mostly by corporations? Really? Yeah. There were hundreds of corporate ranches. There was stock being sold in New York and Boston and Edinburgh. I think there's a very tight connection between Edinburgh investors and ranches happening on the Great Plains.
Would they ship the livestock back?
No, the livestock was raised in the plains, and then was typically fattened up in a place like Iowa, and then slaughtered in Chicago, Kansas City, things like that. And over time, by the end of the century, close to the end of the century, they developed refrigeration, so they were able to send slaughtered
Oh,
meat.
come on.
They wouldn't send the animals themselves. But the point is, ranching, for all of our images of lonesome cowboys,
Yes.
cattle drivers, ranching is an international corporatized business. One more way in which we see the West as modernizing America. Yeah, it was as much corporatized enterprise as iron and steel, or petroleum, at least. Modern business.
Which is bizarre to imagine what it was like before ranching. Because, well, that probably led rise to the market hunting, right? Because where else are you going to get your meat from?
That was before.
Right.
Market hunting was
Before ranching, yeah.
Before ranching,
Right.
But you're right, it's the same thing.
Because, like, before ranching, where did they get their meat? Like, if people came over here en masse from Europe, what were they eating?
Well, they were eating a lot of beef, a lot of pigs.
They were eating a lot of bear, too, which is wild.
Well, early on,
Yeah.
early settlement. But there was, Americans are traditional carnivores. They're also, of course, eating a lot of wild game, as well, like bear. But that beef and that pork, those are raised on farms. Individuals, you would raise your own cattle.
To feed your own family.
That's right, and you slaughter it that particular time of the year to do it. What happens after it starts in California, actually. The first time you see modern ranching develop is before the Civil War, out in California, to feed the gold mines. But then it becomes a national phenomenon after the Civil War, when you begin to raise cattle on a mass scale on public land out in the Great Plains. Now you have a modern transportation system, railroads, make their way out onto the plains. So you can take cattle in Texas, southern Texas, you can drive them north on public domain, that's grass free. The fuel for the whole thing is government, coming out of government free. You load them up on cattle cars in Abilene, Dodge City, ship them to the east to fatten them up and then to slaughter. In other words, it becomes a nationalized business, an international business, and it becomes funded in the same way that other new national businesses are corporations. It's all coordinated by the revolution of in communication through the telegraph. So we're using these new revolutionary technologies like the telegraph and the railroad, and new revolutionary economic systems like that of corporate America, sort of these concentrations of capital, to create this new national, international business. It's all part of the
Bro.
but it's a national story in the West that we've turned into this exotic romantic story.
Yeah.
We miss the fact that it's really critical to what's going on across the country.
It's such a fascinating transformation. There's so many moving pieces.
Yeah.
And so little understanding by the general public of all these factors that are at play.
Yeah.
Well, that's why it's so important, Elliot. I appreciate you very much for coming on here
Thank
and
you.
talking about this in your book. This book is not available right now as an audiobook. Do you have plans? Do they have plans to release it?
I think they, last I heard they did. Given the length of it, I have a large stack of packages of lozenges I'm going to send to whoever has to read this today. Try to help him out, yeah.
Well, I know the last Indian War is available.
It's available.
And I'm listening to that right now. So this book right now is only available. You got to read it. Continental Reckoning, the American West, and the Age of Expansion, the West. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Joe.
It was an awesome conversation.
A lot of fun.
Thank you very much. All right, bye, everybody. This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. For many of us, the holiday season means more travel, more shopping, online, and potentially more of your personal information being exposed to identity thieves. But with LifeLock Identity Theft Protection, you have a lot less to worry about during the holidays and beyond, because LifeLock monitors and alerts you to the identity threats you could
key thing that I really heard from you is that by spending some time actually like journaling and understanding your feelings, you were then able to communicate things to the chef that allowed them to respond to you in kind of a positive way, helped you kind of feel better, and it sounds like things are actually a little bit better at work too. Hold on, let me adjust your audio for a second. So today we're going to talk a little bit about journaling. And if you're like me, journaling actually sounds like a terrible idea. I'm supposed to put down my deepest, darkest thoughts on a piece of paper, and then somehow that'll magically improve the problem? Yeah, thanks, but no thanks. What difference does it make if I just write down all of the things that I can't fix? Is it like journaling actually just magically makes things better when we just write about them? And I know this sounds absolutely insane, but the answer is yes. Actually, yes, that's exactly how it works. We have no idea how this actually happens, but it seems like there's actually really strong evidence that journaling just magically makes things better. And you may be confused by that. What do you mean it magically makes things better? So here's just an example of a couple of really interesting studies. So the first is that a group of psychologists have repeatedly measured students who journal, and they journal about all kinds of different things. So sometimes they'll talk about their emotions, sometimes they'll talk about what they're doing that day. But the one thing that's really bizarre is journaling seems to increase their grades. Another example of things kind of magically getting better that we don't understand comes from studies of physiology. So people will do studies on the effects of journaling on things like antibody response to the immune system, response to anti-mental vaccines. There's studies about how journaling improves like blood pressure and even improves some degree of like blood glucose control and all kinds of unrelated things. Hey there, thanks for watching, and I'm glad these videos have been helpful. A lot of times I'll read the comments and see people asking, well, what do I actually do about it? Which is a great question. And unfortunately, the resources out there haven't been that great, which is precisely why I started HCD. HCD coaches are trained on a curriculum that integrates my understanding of what motivates us, what paralyzes us, and most importantly, what leads to lasting behavioral change. If you're ready to take the next step, HCD coaches can help you build a life that you need. They help people build careers, help people find relationships, build networks of friends, and even do things like discover their passion or pursue hobbies. So if this sounds like something that you'd be interested in, check out the link in the description. So what do we know about how it works, right? So okay, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, wait, so like if I start journaling, it's going to improve my blood pressure, make me physically healthier, and also increase my grades. Like that sounds really bizarre. Like how on earth can it possibly do that? And so let's try to dive in and understand a little bit about the mechanisms of journaling. So the first thing that makes journaling actually kind of hard is if you have a problem in life, you spend most of your time avoiding that problem, right? So like if I'm worried about what my friends think of me, I'm not going to spend my time thinking about it, or I don't want to spend my time thinking about it, because spending my time thinking about it, like having a thought loop about it, seems to not help at all. And instead, what our mind naturally wants to do is distract ourselves from problems. So your mind may be kind of like this, like you may be thinking, okay, if I can fix something, I'm happy to think about it. So I'm happy to work on a problem, but it results in something productive. But I don't want to spend time thinking about something unless it actually like moves the needle forward or something, right? So completely natural. So when you journal about something that is emotionally challenging, it tends to evoke those emotions. And this is exactly what we spend most of our time avoiding, right? This is why we will spend time on social media or play video games or whatever, because we want to avoid these negative emotions. But there's something that's really interesting that happens in the journal. So when you journal, you start to evoke these emotions, but you evoke them in kind of like a diet sort of way. So it's not like regular aerobics, like diet or diet. So if emotional burden that you feel when you journal is less than the actual experience. So some people have hypothesized that this is almost like trauma exposure therapy, where you're exposing yourself to your negative emotions in small doses. And what we tend to see over time with people who journal is like, yeah, the experience of journaling is kind of uncomfortable, but what it actually does is teaches you how to tolerate discomfort. And so if you're thinking about, if you journal about, let's say, an uncomfortable social situation, an awkward social situation, like you're at a restaurant and the waiter walks up to you and says, enjoy your meal, and then you say, thanks, you too, and then you're cringing about it for the next couple of days, and as you're trying to fall asleep, you have a really cringe moment where you're terrified, right? There's nothing you can really do about it. As you journal that, the cringe comes off. And the interesting thing is that as you experience more and more of that negative emotion while you're journaling, over time, people have done studies on this, the amount of negative emotion that you experience, or really the amount of stress that you experience from recalling the emotion actually goes down. And so as your stress level goes down, you start to resist negative emotion. And then what happens is something actually really cool, is now that you no longer need to fear negative emotion, you can actually have cringe moments and not worry about them. So it seems that journaling actually increases our ability to tolerate negative emotion. So the more we journal, it seems like one of the biggest advantages is that increase in journaling decreases our avoidance of negative things or things that make us feel bad. There are a couple of other angles of journaling that people sort of hypothesized or explored. So another good example of this is building a narrative. There's a lot of research that shows that if human beings go through a traumatic experience, they don't all develop PTSD. So for example, there are human beings that will go through a traumatic experience, and like half of them will enter into something called post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth is when something kind of bad happens to you, but you grow as a person, and you actually end up kind of like better than you started off. And there's some people that I've talked to that were super bizarre, but like I remember seeing, working with cancer patients when I was a medical student and an intern, and them saying weird things like cancer survivors, like, yeah, cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm sitting there thinking like, what do you mean, how on earth can that possibly make sense? Cancer is devastating. And they'll say this weird kind of stuff like, oh yeah, like cancer made me realize like how much like life is, how amazing life truly is. It made me appreciate life so much more, it made me appreciate people around me, like all this kind of like super positive stuff. I'm kind of scratching my head, but like, okay, if that's what you say. On the flip side, sometimes if you have a traumatic experience, it's not what doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. The other unfortunate truth is that what doesn't kill you can cripple you for the rest of your life. And this is the case of something like PTSD, where a trauma lingers and continues to damage someone. Then some researchers got kind of curious and we're trying to figure out, okay, what's the difference between going the post-traumatic growth route and going the post-traumatic stress disorder route? What determines whether someone is able to like heal from trauma and become a stronger person? One of the major variables is something called narrative. So people who are able to construct some kind of narrative about their life are the ones who will like grow from negative experiences. This is where doing something like journaling can actually help us construct a narrative. It is a very, very cohesive exercise that can help us make sense of the events around us. There's studies that show that people who journal will change their pronoun usage. Now we're not talking about transgender kind of stuff. What I mean is that if you normally think about a situation, so let's say that you have social anxiety, and you sort of think about a situation, and as your mind understands the situation, you think, oh my god, I look so stupid, oh my god, these people don't like me, I don't know how to behave properly, people must think I'm awkward, people must feel like I'm a third wheel, people must not like the way that I think. And so if you think about those thoughts, what is the subject of those thoughts? I'm saying people think this about me, people think that about me, people think this about me, people think that about me. And so one of the really interesting things is that when people are stuck in a negative cognitive pattern, they tend to be focused either too much on themselves, I'm at fault, this is all my fault, this is my problem, I'm wasting space, people, I don't like hanging out with people, or whatever. It's I, or it's people. And if you look at someone like a narcissist, this is a really good example. Narcissists, when they have a narrative about their life, other people are always these people don't like me, they don't respect me, they don't love me, despite everything I do, they don't experience gratitude for me. Someone who's narcissistic is always thinking about them. On the flip side, it's like a mood disorder, the person who's always always thinking, I'm always thinking, my family's better off, etc. I don't like the way that I look, and I live here, I'm ugly, I'm this. So the key thing, though, is that narcissists always use them for people, and people who are depressed will always use I. So there's data that shows that when you start to journal, that becomes so literally people will analyze the pronouns that are used in journaling. At the beginning of journaling, you'll say I, or you'll say they. But as you journal more, you start to think these statements. So this is an example, let's say a narcissist who journals will say, these people don't like me, these people don't respect me, and then over time as they journal, they'll start to say, well, sometimes I don't behave respectfully towards them. Sometimes maybe I'm the one who's actually at fault. I could have started doing better. And for people who are depressed, will see the opposite. I'm a waste of space, I'm not valuable. Other people sometimes don't treat me with respect. And I sometimes can be valuable, but people don't give me what I deserve. So what we'll literally see is a fluctuation in the pronoun. And what that sort of indicates is that people are changing their narratives. So as a narcissist starts to journal, they start to realize, and they start to use more I statements and start to realize, oh, maybe I am an A. And this is really cool because once you start to realize, okay, wait a second, maybe they're not to blame, maybe I'm to blame. You may need that, or the flip side, if you have super low self-esteem, you're always going to be blaming yourself, and you'll start to hold other people accountable. So it seems like journaling helps us kind of change perspectives and build a more cohesive narrative. So I think
come on.
sometimes we get stuck in life is because we don't actually learn from our mistakes. Right? So if you play like a video game, for example, you can be hard stuck at bronze for like years. And sometimes in real life, that's sort of true too. A good example would be something where you feel like this kind of stuff keeps happening, you find yourself in the same situation over and over again. And one of the interesting things there is like you look at something like therapy or coaching. These are things that help you understand where the problem is. And journaling can sometimes help you understand that. I think of journaling kind of like a replay house, where if you think about, okay, I can play 5 rounds of a particular video game, but which one will actually teach me more? If I play with 5 rounds of a video game, or if I play 3 rounds of a video game, and I spend 2 hours like analyzing my replays and thinking about what I can do better. It turns out that's with journaling as well, because as we go through life, we never really sit down and like think about, in a kind of objective, cohesive way, what we could be doing better. Our mind may generate all kinds of thoughts, but it's different, right? So if you sit down and actually watch your replays, you're going to notice so much more about what you can do. Anyone who plays a game and loses a game will immediately, if you ask them some kind of question, hey, why did you lose this game? They'll jump to some answer, right? They'll give you an answer. They'll say, oh, I lost this game because ABCD. They think they know what the answer is. But if that same person actually sits down and watches a replay, what they'll discover is 10,000 things that their mind didn't immediately jump to. So hopefully by now you're really kind of give journaling a shot. And so then the next question becomes, okay, how do I journal? And this is super cool because a lot of people are trying to figure out, okay, like what's the right way to journal? So just to give you all a couple of examples. There's some studies that look at journaling like 15 minutes a day for 7 days in a row. There's some studies that look at journaling like 30 minutes once a week for like 7 weeks. There are all kinds of different like dosages and frequencies and durations of journaling. So here's what we kind of know about it. The first is that journaling can have delayed effects. So there's some studies that show that even a single episode of journaling can lead to some kind of improvement or revelation up to 6 months away. So I know it sounds kind of bizarre, but this is one of the reasons that it's hard to journal because you don't really see the benefits right away. So it does appear that journaling can have very delayed benefits that are kind of unexpected. The next thing is that there isn't really a magical formula, so I'd say kind of do what works for you. You need some degree of consistency, so I'd say anywhere between 15 minutes and 1 hour, and as frequently as every day if you feel like it, or up to once a week. Now, what kind of stuff should you journal about? Now, this is what's super interesting. So there's some data that shows that it doesn't matter what you journal about, you're going to get some kind of benefit. But what I found to be consistently useful for psychological things is, first of all, that you write about some kind of emotional experience that you had. And what do we mean by emotional experience? We don't really just mean something that happened bad. Like, if you had an awesome week, you could talk about like how awesome your week was and how grateful you are to your friends. Because expressing gratitude in journaling is a whole different area of research that shows all kinds of positive benefits. The second thing is that I would strongly recommend that from time to time you actually read your journal. And for those of y'all that are paranoid that someone else is going to find my journal and read it, just think about this for a second, okay? We have professional authors who have dedicated their entire life to
Let's
writing
go.
to entice someone to read it. These are things like best-selling novels. And if you were to pick up a best-selling novel today, what do you think would happen? You'd read a little bit of it and you'd set it down. Our attention span is now so short that no one will have the attention span and dedication to sit down and read through some kind of amateur fan fiction autobiography crap that is your life. So if you're like me, you're terrified that people are going to read your journal, but they don't have the attention span for it. You can write whatever you want, and it doesn't really matter. Write for you. Okay, so write about emotional experiences if you can. You want to read it from time to time. The one thing that I highly recommend is that you physically write. So a lot of people will like to journal using something like, a Word editing software or something like that, like Word, Google Docs, or whatever. And you can journal on a laptop. There's no big deal with that or desktop or whatever. But there are a couple of things about physically writing that I think are really important. The first is that physically writing slows your thoughts down. If you slow your thoughts down, you'll kind of sit with them a little bit more, and you'll be able to process things a little bit. The other really interesting thing about writing is that writing commits things to memory. If you have some kind of insight, like this may have happened to you before, where you kind of have this brilliant idea as you're going to bed at night, and what happens the next day? Do you remember what your brilliant idea is? The next day you wake up, it kind of disappears, right? This brilliant idea, oh my god, this is how I made $1 billion. I had this great product idea. I had this great idea for a story. I had all these great ideas, and they just disappear in the wind. Another simple example of this is you can read something, like study something for school, and you can understand it while you're reading it. The next day, where does it go? It's here. So one of the cool things about journaling is that whatever you write about will sink into your memory more. I kind of think about journaling like getting into a canoe and kind of going down river, where the part that you control is like, sure, you're paddling a little bit here or there, but it's primarily the river that's carrying you downstream, right? And the same thing kind of happens from journals, is that, sure, you can pick a particular topic, but if you journal for 30 minutes, I can almost guarantee you that where you end up will be very different from where you started. At the end of the day, a lot of people are really concerned about journaling, right? So we've heard that journaling is good for you. Like, you can look at this article about like how to deal with burnout on LinkedIn, written by some guy with an MBA, says, oh yeah, journaling's really good. And you can hear about psychiatrists like myself or therapists or other people like maybe your friends who are like, yeah, like journaling is totally helpful, like journaling helps so much. But if you're kind of like me, you don't really know how to journal, right? All it does is even if I write about the terrible stuff, first of all, it makes me feel terrible about it. Secondly, it doesn't actually fix the problem. Thirdly, what if someone reads it? This sounds like a terrible idea. You're asking me to commit evil painful thoughts that I have to piece of paper, and then I seem vulnerable, and like anyone can read that. Sounds like a terrible idea. It does sound like a terrible. And that's why if you really understand how journaling works, if you really understand some of the data behind the evidence behind journaling, and you start to understand a little bit about how it actually works, you'll be amazed, first of all, how easy it is, and second of all, how much it actually is.
Oh! What happened? Wait, were you listening to Dr. K? What did he say? I missed it. I didn't miss it, but I missed when you said that. Also, I'm about to head to the gym, but I'll be back. I don't know if I'm gonna stream when I get back because I got some stuff to do, but I will be at my computer. So if you wanna talk or whatever, I'm down. If you wanna sit in Discord or something, I'm down. Dude, I made coffee like an hour ago, and I've got to shit so bad. Also, I don't know how much delay is on YouTube. Twitch is much shorter, but I don't know about YouTube. Might play some League. Alright, bet. What time are you going to bed, and how free are you today? I'd be down to play some fucking Risk of Rain or something. We haven't done that in a minute. I was thinking about that the other day. $11? Okay. I'll probably be back like 6. And I'll probably take a shower. And then probably before 6, honestly, because I'm only in there for like an hour. But I'll be definitely back before fucking 11. I'm down though. I'll let you know, and we can hop in a Discord or something. All right, I got to shit, and I'm about to head to the gym, but I'll be back. All right, bro. Love you. I appreciate you coming by, man. I've been streaming Zombies and JRE. He puts out an episode every day of the week usually, and I've been watching that and playing Zombies. It's been therapeutic. But all right, I'm about to head out. I will talk to you when I get back. Love you, bro.